Joining Al Jazeera is Major General William Caldwell. He's spokesperson for multinational forces in Iraq. Thank you very much for being with us. 4 years on after the fall of Baghdad, do you think it was right to invade Iraq?
What I think is right is to give the people of Iraq the opportunity to have a life they didn't have before.
But you're not answering my question, General Caldwell. Do you think back then the right decision was made to invade the country?
Well, Sam, what I tell you is people will debate that for another 20 or 30 years, whether it was right or not. But what I can tell you is that the opportunities exist today for the Iraqi people that were never there before. And that is very important.
But you haven't achieved any of your goals, have you? Weapons of mass destruction, stability in the country?
Well, you know, the goal wasn't just to eliminate the weapons of mass destruction. Our president has said before that is to give the people of Iraq the opportunities that didn't exist. I mean, they have a hope today for a future that never existed before, and that's very important for them.
4 years ago, did the U.S. military ever think the war would go down the road it has now?
No, I don't think anybody probably did.
Do you think you've made mistakes?
There's no question. Everybody would agree that there's some mistakes that have been made. But what's important is what are we doing about it in the future?
If I could take you back, though, for a moment, what would you have done differently?
Well, that's a little bit of a hypothetical.
You admitted that there were some mistakes that you think you made. What were they? What would you have liked to have done differently?
Well, I think if everybody looked back again, that we'd ask ourselves, should we have supported the debathification process? Did we have conducted how it did? To alienate so many of the people who cared about Iraq and wanted to still see Iraq stay as a unified nation. Should we have disbanded the army perhaps like we did? Should we have kept it perhaps more intact and utilized more of those who did care about the unified Iraq and wanted to support the new government that was being formed?
Iraq is a very complicated situation. Who is your enemy in that country?
Our enemy is Al-Qaeda, number one, without question. I just look at recent events again, and it's that element, that ideology, that is trying to tear down and make the people not believe that there's a future for them, when in fact there is. And I think the Iraqi people are starting to realize that, and you see that in a lot of their actions, from out west in Al-Anbar to other places in the country, where the people are telling Al-Qaeda, enough, we don't want you here, you're not looking out for the good of our nation.
Do you think that that was one of the mistakes of the war or the invasion? Because prior to the invasion, Al-Qaeda didn't have a substantial presence that we know about in Iraq.
I'm not sure anybody predicted that evolution that would have occurred with Al-Qaeda trying to move into Iraq and establish a base there. I think we always would have told you there was a presence there, but it was able to flourish and grow when in fact there was no clear security forces in place like there are being developed today.
So in other words, the answer is yes, General Caldwell.
Yes, no, I would say we did not see it grow into the levels that it has today.
Other than Al-Qaeda, other than the groups you describe as terrorist groups, are there groups which you would agree they are resistance groups in Iraq?
There are groups that really don't want any foreigners in the country. But it's been very interesting in the year that I've been there almost now in Iraq this time, is I see them reaching out now and engaging with us. We have a tremendous amount of engagement going on with a lot of elements within Iraq that when I arrived a year ago we were not having discussions with.
Well, you said you're holding contacts with different groups. Does that include armed groups at this point in time? Are you holding discussions, contacts with armed Iraqi groups?
We are.
You wouldn't tell me who those groups are, would you?
I would say anybody at all that wants to sit down at a table and have a discussion, who wants to be part of the reconciliation process, we're willing to. Because there's going to reach a point, we're going to have fully identified those who are not willing to reconcile. We'll call them irreconcilables. We're going to have to kill or capture all of them.
So who are the reconcilables from your perspective that you're talking to? Do they include groups like the Islamic Army in Iraq?
Right now, they're obviously very sensitive and delicate ongoing discussions, and something we just haven't talked publicly about what groups they are, and would really want them to probably be the first to come out and acknowledge and talk about it. But they're ongoing discussions. They've been very positive discussions, a good exchange of information. We're making sure that we keep the government of Iraq informed and aware of all these activities. But that's going to be very important if we're ever going to reconcile all the differences among the Iraqi people and bring them back together as one nation.
Do you think, General Caldwell, that the fact that you are talking to some groups, the fact that you are making a distinction, does that give them some legitimacy as resistance to your presence?
I think what it does, it gives them an understanding that we want everybody to be part of the political process. We want them all to come back together and work to unify this nation of theirs back as one, so that the United States can go home and return to our country.
What is your strategy in Iraq now?
To protect the people.
What are the benchmarks, the measure, what's the measure you use that will tell you when your mission is done?
That's a great question. I think we'd all agree that when the levels of violence come down.
But by how much? I mean,
well, to the level where the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police can handle it on their own. We'll never eliminate it. It's not going to be eliminated any time in the next few years. And I think we all need to understand that. But it needs to be brought down to a level that the Iraqi police and the Iraqi army are able to handle it without the coalition forces present, so that we can go home.
Who will make that call that the Iraqi forces are now ready and able to take over? They can handle the current level of violence. Will it be you?
It ultimately needs to be the government of Iraq. But obviously they're going to probably ask us for our opinion, our assessment, and we'll provide them a very open and frank assessment of that.
So you're saying, just to make sure I understand you correctly, that for you, your mission is done when the violence drops to a certain level?
When the violence drops to a certain level, and the Iraqi police and the army
are able to take over,
are above that level and able to handle it within their country and take care of and secure their people.
So the political situation, some of the other goals that the United States has talked about in Iraq are no longer part of the benchmark?
No, I wouldn't say that. I was saying it more from a military perspective, as a military officer. There are other things that I know our political process has looked at.
Coming back to the issue of the capability of Iraqi forces, their ability to control the violence, by how much does the violence need to come down, or what percentage of violence do you think the Iraqi forces are capable of dealing with? I mean, recent reports talked about the violence having dropped in some areas by as much as 50%. Clearly, you don't think, or the US military doesn't think that's enough. How much more does it need to come down, and how much can the Iraqi security forces take control of?
The best gauge will be when the levels drop down and then it's sustained over a period of time.
But by how much? I'm sorry to press you, but
yeah.
What is the measure that you are waiting to see before you report back to your superiors and say, I think the Iraqi forces can now take control of this, it's time for us to go home?
Well, it'd be great if there was a precise measurement that anybody could use to accurately measure that. But we'll be able to sense it from the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people will be the best measurement that we can possibly use. They will tell us, they will tell the Iraqi government, they will tell the Iraqi security forces when they feel that they're able to perform their mission in a completely fair, completely unbiased way, taking care of all Iraqi people. When that can be accomplished, then clearly that's when we need to be gone. But we can move out incrementally before then. We can start moving out major combat forces before that's fully achieved by leaving our transition teams fully embedded and associated with the Iraqi police and the Iraqi army units.
Do you think the US military could withdraw by 2008?
I think that you'll see major combat forces levels drop in 2008 for sure.
So you're not against those in the US who say, let's fix a 2008 withdrawal date? That is a practical scenario from your perspective?
I don't think you should ever pick an arbitrary date and say, well, this is when we're going to do something. I think it should be conditions based. I think it should be done in close consultation with the government of Iraq, but more importantly by the people of Iraq and how they are stating that their security is being provided to them by their security forces. I mean, that's probably the best gauge of all is the people themselves.
From a military perspective, you don't think there is anything to hold you back from saying 2008 should be the year you begin to withdraw, sometime during 2008? Why do you think there's resistance on the part of some in the government to look at 2008 as the withdrawal year, if there are no military objections to it?
Well, because again, I think everybody, there shouldn't be an arbitrary date, like some are trying to make right now. I think
But you just said 2008 is,
right.
From your perspective,
well,
is
from the development I've seen of the Iraqi security forces, the police and the army over the last 2 years, and especially this last year when I've been inside of Iraq and watched them, there's every reason to believe that within the next year we can remove some of our major combat forces from Iraq.